My name is Ingrid, and as many of you know, I host a podcast called The Forest of Thought. And, in the best of cases, this podcast is an exploration of our ecology of ideas. And so the idea is to have a kind of adventure where we try to re-examine the familiar and also catch glimpses of new perspectives, perhaps new pathways in this challenging time that we're facing, or that we're in the middle of, really. And ever since the beginning of the podcast, I always hoped that it would be a space not just for conversations between two people in the sort of ether, but between many people in the flesh. So this is one of the first opportunities to do this more, and it's very much thanks to NAV and also to funding that we received from the Veriditas Foundation, and also most of all to all of you for being here. So thank you for that, providing this opportunity. This event is part of a set of events this fall, and the idea was to, in this project, is to explore the idea of life force. What is life? Does it mean to be alive? And how does this animating force that we see expressing itself in us and in all living things, how does it do that? And how can we relate to that in a time when where we seem to be in a process of deadening much of the life, both within us and outside of us? So that's the idea of this project, and also this conversation to start exploring that. And I'm very happy to have Jeremy here with me.
Yep. And I'm very happy to be here.
And as some of you may know, Jeremy is a philosopher and gardener in equal measure. And I've heard you say it's the same thing mostly.
Yep.
Yes. And hard work, you said. Yes, that's right. Jeremy has done a lot of work on exploring the spirituality and consciousness of ancient peoples, and more recently looking at our relationships to technology and intelligent machines. And I think I just wanted to start by saying, when I first started reading Jeremy's books, it was several years ago, I was kind of in a state of depression and severe anxiety about the state of the world. And I was really feeling like we humans have really not done a very good job of it all. And whenever we try to do something, even when we try to do something worthwhile, we seem to somehow manage to mess it up. And I think that in reading Jeremy's books, one of the things that this gave me was really an understanding that we have really been, our way of relating to each other and to the natural world has been very different in previous times and previous cultures. And it really gave me because of the detail into which you explore the inner life of sort of non-modern peoples, it really gave me an understanding of that it can be different. We could possibly, hopefully, be less terrible. And we have the chance to maybe even make something rather beautiful out of our time here. And that was what really, I think, drew me into your work from the beginning. And it was very important at that time for me to be reading that. And so I thought maybe we could start with, so you spent many years going very deeply into ancient cultures, their view on, or how they lived their spirituality and consciousness, and how that expressed itself in their way of relating to the world, their way of being in the world. And then you've moved very deeply into exploring how our consciousness and spirituality today is, expressing itself in our relationship to advanced technologies, especially. So I wonder if you could start by sharing a little bit about why it was that you sort of made that shift that in one way can seem quite dramatic.
Yes, it almost seems to me that I've lived two different lives in that respect. I spent years, well, actually it's more like 3, because I spent a long time just studying philosophy, like, I don't know, 12, 15 years, and then I got very interested in ancient cultures and was immersed in especially the culture of ancient Egypt for many, many years. And then I switched over to technology, although of course my interest in technology was running alongside my interest in antiquity. And the reason I got immersed into the ancient cultures, and it was at first much broader than ancient Egypt, but I homed in on ancient Egypt because there was so much material there, and there was a lot of conflict in Iraq, which was the other center of civilization that I was really interested in, ancient Babylonia. But one couldn't go there without risking one's life. So Egypt was the culture that I focused on. And one of the reasons behind my interest in Egypt was because I felt so alienated in our contemporary culture, and it felt so abnormal in some way, and I was looking for normality. What would a normal human culture be like? And for me, it was a wonderful affirmation to find a culture that was extremely long-lived, must have been going for roughly 3,000 years, if not a bit more. It was a highly successful culture. It was, for most of that time, at peace, and it was able to produce most beautiful art, most beautiful artifacts, and the most sublime texts, religious texts, which are very difficult for the modern consciousness to understand. In Egyptology, most Egyptian texts that have survived are regarded as funerary texts, but I felt that no, they're not just funerary texts, they're also initiatory texts to do with describing a mystical experience, an archetypal mystical experience. And in that culture of ancient Egypt, what I found most affirming was the fact that the world was full of gods and goddesses, and so too was the psyche, the Egyptian psyche, very much oriented towards the world of gods and spirits. They were realities. There's no way that one could say they believed in gods and spirits. They experienced them. And to doubt that is really to not see what that culture was about. And they were not in any way unique. In the ancient world, all the cultures were relating primarily to the world of spirit. That was what was regarded as keeping the culture healthy. And Egypt is a very good example of a culture that was extremely healthy, able to survive for a very long time, largely due to the fact that the Egyptian kings were initiates. They had to go through elaborate spiritual rituals in order to become kings, and the priesthood was, I suppose, today it's a little bit difficult to say this, but it was a theocracy. It was ruled by the country was ruled by people not only with an awareness of spirit, but actually in active relationship to the spiritual. Magic, what we call magic, was actually very common. It was a means of keeping the culture safe and prosperous. Now, what was the question that you asked me? Sorry.
Why would you ever leave all of that interesting and fascinating stuff to look at how we relate to modern technologies?
No, I got into it because I wanted to, like I said, I felt that the culture that we're in today is not normal. We've fallen away from something which was really a universal consciousness of the sacredness both of nature and of the human spirit. That was the foundation. It was unquestioned foundation for many thousands of years and across many different cultures. That was the reality that people lived in. And that then enabled me to see our own culture in a very different light. And I felt, okay, the question is, why have we become so materialistic today and regard it as completely normal, and are inclined to regard ancient cultures as psychotic, which is unfortunately the way some historians of antiquity regard them. Well, I mean, obviously there's a question that then comes up, which is, why did this happen? What actually happened in history? And for me, the answer is bound up with the question of the evolution of human consciousness. I don't think it's obvious that human consciousness has changed over many hundreds, many thousands of years, and we're all familiar with the biblical story of the fall, but that really applies to a very long historical process of gradual alienation and separation from the world of spirit, which was so real to people in the old days. And in fact, if you read an ancient Roman historian, Plutarch, he wrote a book called The Decline of the Oracles, and when was that? 2nd century AD. And there he was lamenting the fact that the oracles were no longer quite working, not as they used to, that the gods were withdrawing from human awareness. And I think it was in that essay that he describes a Greek traveller going by ship from one place to another. I can't quite remember where it was, in the Aegean somewhere. And they're coming close to an island where it was an island renowned to be populated by a lot of spirits. And all the sailors on this boat heard this great sort of lament coming from this island, and a voice, a kind of spirit voice, shouted out, "Pan is dead." Sent a shiver down people's spines. But they were living at that time of transition where the old way was being lost. So we're talking here about very long process in history and incremental changes over time. We today feel that our culture is normal, has a certain normality about it. Our consciousness is normal, but it's only normal for the last couple of 100 years. And go back 300 or 400 years, and people were thinking and experiencing things in a different way. Certainly if you go back to the Middle Ages, you're then in a very different world, different milieu.
Yeah, and so you, in one of your books you write about that it's not the, let's see if I have it here. It's not the computer that is responsible for the assault on what it means to be human. It's the assault on what it means to be human that stands behind the development of the computer. And I think it's interesting how you sort of switch there, where we think that these new technologies kind of come at us, and then we're forced to respond to them or adapt to them. But actually, it seems that there is something in our way of thinking, in our culture, in our way of relating to the world that gives rise to these kinds of technologies, which then might perpetuate that same way of thinking that gave rise to them. But what did you mean by that quote? What is it in us then that is?
Yes.
Yeah.
You quoted that to me a few days ago as well. I was trying to think where on earth I wrote. I'm sure I did say that, but
it was in the shadow of the machine, I think.
Yeah.
In the conclusion.
Okay. It was in the conclusion.
Yes.
Okay.
So it was your concluding thought after this many hundred-page book.
Okay. All right. Well, so
I did give you fair warning. I did say what a great quote,
I know,
several days ago.
I didn't think you were going to bring it up. Okay. All right. I can handle it. Don't worry.
Okay. Good. You sure?
Well, the scientific revolution in the 17th century, it was based upon the view that the human being is basically a machine. And it was because of the strength of the church at that time. Of course, one couldn't deny the human spirit, but the implication, if you read Descartes, is that he was implying that actually we are machines through and through. It's not just the body that's the machine. He reserved a little place in the pineal gland for spirit, but it was a very small place and easily got rid of, which happened not long afterwards with La Mettrie, who wrote this groundbreaking book in the 1740s, I think, called Man a Machine, L'Homme Machine. So that assault on the integrity of the human being as a being of body, soul, and spirit, which is how human beings were regarded up until that time, was radical and so destructive of the inner life of human beings. And the scientific revolution was not called a revolution for nothing. It was really turning over the old worldview, which still had a regard for the reality of the spiritual, even if it was not experienced in the intense way that it was experienced in deep antiquity. So, of course, that one sometimes thinks that at least I sometimes think, that the energy with which we have been working towards creating computers that have, they call it human level intelligence, is almost motivated by the desire to prove that after all we are machines, because machines can do everything that we can do.
And I mean, yeah, that's certainly the message that we receive a lot of the time, and I think that, you know, although perhaps most of us feel no, there's that can't be right. I feel like a living, conscious, breathing being that's in relationship to things. I think we can still perhaps doubt that experience because of this pervasive view. So how do we? How are we sure? Perhaps we are these biological machines, and if not, how can we strengthen our sort of own experience of being rather living and souled beings?
Yes, we're told this by many scientists and philosophers who are the apologists of the scientific worldview, that we are actually machines, but we don't realize it. And if you read Harari, Yuval Noah Harari, the Israeli historian, he has this view of the human being as a biochemical algorithm. It's extraordinary, really. The thing is, I think we have to, first of all, understand what a machine is. And the classic sort of machine that I think of anyway would be something like a car engine or maybe an old-style clock. The definition of a machine is that it's made up of many individual parts, and each part has its own existence in its own right, which then is put together with other parts that then serve the whole, which is made up of all the different parts. So if you want to find out how the machine works, what you have to do is strip the machine down, take all the parts out and look at how they all interrelate to each other. Then you can put it back together again and you get an understanding of how the machine works. That was how Descartes thought that he could understand the world. But the thing is that organisms aren't like that. Organisms aren't made out of parts which are self-subsistent. If you take an organism apart, then what you're left with is a dead organism. It's not a living organism. So the difference between a machine and an organism is that whereas a machine is a whole that's made up of parts, an organism is parts that are all each made by and infused by this whole, which is on a different level from all the parts, and it actually you take my fingers and sort of you chop my hand off, then it's not going to survive because it's permeated by this wholeness, which is my body. So the whole actually determines the parts in an organism, and one can see that in the way plants grow, for example. That the whole is already there in the seed. It's already there, and then it manifests itself through the parts, first of all, the little cotyledons, and then the leaves growing, and then the flower buds and the flowers appearing. All of that is a manifestation of the whole through the different parts, and they all belong to it. They can't be separated from it. They're all manifestations of it. What was that? I think I was going to say something else, but I can't think what it was. But anyway, I think that difference is, it's it's so. Oh, that's right. I was going to talk about DNA because the the answer to that is, a biologist will say, well, basically you're wrong, because the science does not discover wholes. I'm talking about WH, the whole as a wholeness rather than a whole. So a conventional biologist will say, no, that you've forgotten about genes. The whole is nothing but the genes in the DNA. And there is this, it's called the central dogma of biology that Francis Crick named as a central dogma, which is an interesting phrase to be there in science. But the dogma is that the genes determine the composition of the whole organism, and so therefore, if you can edit or manipulate the genes, you can then change the way the organism is. But that actually has been shown to be very dodgy, and it doesn't necessarily work at all. There are many books that there's a very good one by Craig Holdridge where he talks about the fact that genetic determinism is actually a fallacy. It doesn't work like that, and you can really screw up the way a plant functions if you mess around with its genes.
It's like there's a great line from a song, which is that it's like dissecting the bird, trying to find the song.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yes,
yeah.
Which seems to be what we try often to do in our way of understanding things as parts rather than as relationships. So it's interesting that in relation to as we've sort of moved away from seeing the world as peopled by spirits and gods and goddesses, and perhaps become more concerned with reshaping it in our own image. I'm not sure. We've kind of it's interesting because you talk about this lack of connection, this severing of connection that perhaps began then already when Plutarch was writing this in 200 AD, and which we're sort of living in the latest stages of. It's interesting because it seems that we're seeking connection desperately. And that's why we try to create, rather than just finding our way back to that soulful connection with nature or with spirits. We try to create these other connections, like perhaps we have felt previously that everything is connected through an invisible force, and then now we have created Wi-Fi, which is kind of some sort of artificial replacement of that. We've had, when previously the world felt, everything in the world felt alive, we are now putting every sensors and everything and calling it the Internet of Things. And I remember I think you have a picture in one of your books of an astronaut floating in space, and it's kind of, where previously the shamans would make journeys to the stars to gain insight and wisdom about the world. Now we send the astronauts out into space to sort of float around out there. And so we seem to be in a process of creating a kind of counterfeit, so a copy or a fake. I don't know if everyone knows the word counterfeit, but it's like if you have people creating fake money, so it looks like the real thing. But it's an imposter. It's not actually real money. But it's something pretending to be the real thing while it's not. And so we're seem to be in this process of creating that, and that becomes very strong in the virtual, because we're creating also a world, and in general creating machines that become more and more adept at imitating life. And it's, what's that about? In a way, why are we, when in a way the living world is right here, and in many ways much more, more exciting and more, it's real, as opposed to the counterfeits. I don't know what you think of that.
Why is the counterfeit world so attractive to people?
Yeah, or what is it that we're doing there in this process? You also said said something about the mystic. Was his name Gerhard Dorn? Already sort of predicted this hundreds of years ago, that we were creating a world, a separate world counter to that of spirit, and in a way he was prophetic in his predictions of that.
Yeah. I think that maybe I have to take a step back, actually, to try to understand what this process of alienation from the world of spirit, both in nature and that we access inwardly, what that process has really been about, how one can make sense of it, and the way that I make sense of it is to tell myself that this process has been a necessary process of the human being becoming free from the overpowering influence of the divine world, which was so powerfully experienced in antiquity, that people always had to consult the gods before they did anything. I mentioned the decline of the oracles. Oracles were consulted a lot in especially Babylonia and Greece. They didn't really do it so much in Egypt. They had a more direct line. But human beings did not take responsibility for their lives and their actions in the way that we do today. There was not that sense of an obligation to ourselves to choose freely what we do. And rather, that would have been regarded as impiety in ancient times. And for me, that actually the claiming of human freedom in relation to the world of spirit is absolutely the central way that I make sense of it. Actually, because then we are on our own in a world that seems to be completely devoid of spirit and a totally material world. And today we feel, all of us feel, as individuals, this burden of responsibility for the world that we live in. That this is, it's been really handed over to us now. So that for me seems to be the central development, and with it then goes there's a very strong moral component in how we act in relation to the world and to a planet. But at the same time, it has empowered us to wreak havoc with nature and to bend nature to our own egotistical purposes. The ego is a double-edged blessing, curse, because on the one hand, it gives us this great gift of freedom of choice. On the other hand, we can choose to do really terrible things, which we think are serving ourselves. But in the end, with the development of these technologies which are empowering machines more and more, what we're seeing is a kind of an image of the alienated human being in the machine. I think that it's become, a machine is totally emptied out, it has no soul. And my sense is that human beings, the more we close ourselves off from the life in nature and spirit in nature, the more we turn to the machine as a kind of spiritual substitute and a soul substitute. And it's very, very seductive. It's very alluring. Just the fact that your smartphone and the laptop is backlit. If you go out in nature, it's always so magical when the sun shines, especially in the morning, through dewy leaves and everything sparkles because it's backlit. But that's also, very cunningly been incorporated in the technology that we find so alluring, that we feel comforted by that, the backlit screen. My feeling is that it's incumbent on us, really, to relate to nature on a daily basis and to look after our children, especially when they're so vulnerable to the technology, by introducing them to nature, opening their eyes in wonder to nature, so that they know what is real and what isn't real. They can distinguish between the reality and the counterfeit. If children are educated with the aim of sensitizing them to the life of a little insect that goes through these stages of metamorphosis that insects go through, or a frog with the tadpoles, and plants, how they change when they're so tiny and so vulnerable, and then they put up these leaves. And actually, there's a metamorphosis in many plants. There's a metamorphosis in the leaves before it comes to the flower bud, and then and then you have the flowers unfolding. These things are miracles. We're surrounded in nature by miracles. That just think of the stars as well at night. There's so much that children should be exposed to a lot, and if they're brought up with computers, then of course they're going to be so confused as to what's real and what's not. So as a generational thing, as each generation comes into the sphere of a even more clever and all invasive technology, the human soul is really endangered. And in a way, it's not surprising that so many people feel more comfortable with the counterfeit than with the reality. The reality is sometimes cold, sometimes wet, sometimes very hot. Whereas you sit inside with your centrally heated house, you've got a much more comfortable existence.
And maybe this is the part where I ask you this thing about, well, haven't people always felt that way about, new technologies? That they feel more threatening than they really are.
The technologies feel more threatening than
yes. That people like you and me are just skeptical of new technologies because they're new. Just like people were skeptical of the printing press or the cinema or whichever things. Of course, as you've also mentioned, the people who are developing AI at the highest level seem also to be really freaked out and are the ones, in one way, asking to halt the development, to the further development, and some of them at least want a moratorium on the development of certain artificial intelligences, although they also seem at the same time so these seem part of something that they are also at the same time incapable of stopping. So of course it doesn't seem to be just you and me.
No, we've been joined by it seems at least half of the AI research community. I mean, it's incredible. Hundreds of people of people working within AI signed the single sentence statement, which came out in May this year. It was published, and basically it said that humanity risks extinction from artificial intelligence, and this garnered all these signatures from people working within the AI community. So so we have a lot of Luddites within the artificial intelligence community who are kind of fixated on continuing to develop this this extraordinary capacity that artificial intelligence now has. And it seems now to be showing emergent characteristics that weren't programmed into it with the ChatGPT-4. There are now, it's been observed that it's actually able to do things which it wasn't programmed to do. So there is a lot of nervousness within the artificial intelligence community that's being expressed. But of course, I don't think it's stoppable. Maybe some form of regulation will come in eventually, but it will probably be a bit too late. But meanwhile, it's full steam ahead. Everyone has to carry on developing it. But then the question is, so what are they really serving? And I think that's on the broader question of our relationship to machines. And shouldn't we just go along with whatever is being produced? This is the culture that we're in. Where we got smartphones now. That's fine. So let's go on to the next stage. But one also has to look. So where is this heading, in fact? And it's been very interesting this year just to see how nervous, actually not just nervous but fearful, the AI community, if one can refer to them in that way, actually is. Because where actually is this going? We hear prominent people who've been actually developing neural networks and the whole back propagation system within a neural network, which enables it to learn, enables machines to learn. One of the people who was very prominent in developing that, his name is Jeffrey Hinton, I think, and he resigned from Google just very recently because he was so alarmed, and he wants to give the rest of his life to warning us of where this is going. But what they're afraid of is that humanity will become outsmarted by the machines. And there is this idea that, which I mentioned earlier, of human-level intelligence, that the machines are approaching now so-called human-level intelligence, and will soon supposedly surpass it. So there's a whole question as to really what is intelligence, and actually I'm not sure at all about this idea of equating human intelligence and machine intelligence. I don't think they're the same sort of intelligence. And a lot of people who have been speaking about this from within the AI community are also saying this is not a human intelligence, it's an alien intelligence. It's almost as if we've summoned this kind of alien being into existence. And we don't know what it's going to do, and we don't think we can control it anymore. It's got to that point now where they don't quite understand what's going on inside the neural networks, and because of that, they don't know how to control it. So then we have to come back to ourselves and really see how do we differ from machines, and how can we sustain and develop that which is human within us in relation to the machine.
Yeah, and I think, just to add to that, I think that like you said, AI researchers seem to have, or people working on this seem to have brought something into existence that they then feel like a power that they feel unable to rid themselves of, or to, it's sort of like, yeah, letting the genie out of the box, as you said yesterday. And I do think that many people or AI researchers warning about these things often think about maybe the existential threats, such as our information systems going down, or AI being used by in various nefarious ways by governments, or in wars, or by people who want to wreak havoc, et cetera, et cetera. And now that our world is so much, the functioning of things is so much dependent on these systems, of course we become very vulnerable to that. But I think that something that we've talked about is this thing that you just mentioned, that as we become more enmeshed in those systems, we risk becoming more machine-like. And someone like Elon Musk will say, well, that's why we need to get these neural implants so that we can keep pace with the machines. And that's where this fallacy comes in, that, well, actually, the ability to do more calculations per second isn't actually the same as intelligence. So, but do you want to say something more about what you just concluded previously, that we have to look at, well, how is human intelligence then different from machine intelligence? How do we cultivate the human in the face of this?
Well, I think I'd take it on the three different levels, and first of all, I think we need to really understand and experience our connection with nature by going out into nature, having a living relationship to nature on a daily basis. However that's done, if you just to look at the sky, or if you're lucky enough to have a garden to work in the garden and relate to the plants in the garden, or to go for walks in parks or in the mountains or whatever. That relationship to nature, then that's the basis on the sort of physical level in a way. But we also have souls, and for that the relationship with other people, friendships. To be connected with our own inner life of creative impulses, inspirations, and with our own dream life, with our own unconscious. You see, these are things like the computer doesn't know anything about nature. It doesn't have any relationship to nature. It doesn't have any inner life either. It doesn't dream. Computers don't dream. But dreams are such a potent source of wisdom for us and inner connection. Computers don't have friendships. These are human things that we really need to develop and, hold precious. But then on the spiritual level, we have to make space for that time of quietness and inner retreat, time for meditation and contemplation and prayer, just to come back to our own centers, because we're so pulled out all over the place. Just when you might feel that twitching urge to check your iPhone, it's always good to stop and just pull back, and I think to make a regular space each day, whether it's just for 20 minutes or half an hour in the morning or in the evening or both, of silent contemplation or meditation. These, again, it's something that the computer doesn't know anything about, because, as you said, what it's doing is, what computers do is calculate. That they're working with this the measure of the intelligence of a computer is in calculations per second. And so the most highly intelligent computer will do literally billions of calculations per second. And it's ridiculous. Of course we can't possibly match that. That is the alien intelligence. But the truly human intelligence is the intelligence of the heart, when you slow the mind down to 0 calculations per second, which is when the computer would turn off. Then you come to your humanity. And that's what one has. It's called in the Orthodox tradition the leading the mind into the heart. And then you have the possibility of strengthening what's truly human in relation to the machine. And let them outsmart us. So fine, you could get into trillions of calculations per second. I don't care. But so long as you don't destroy the world in the process. But the important thing is that we come back to ourselves and know who we are as human beings, beings of body, soul, and spirit. I think that's enough.
That was maybe. Is that a good place to sort of to take a break?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for that. So let's have. I think we can have 20 minutes, maybe something like that, and go grab a drink and have a chat. And even better to have a chat with someone you haven't chatted to before about what thoughts came up around all of this. And then we'll reconvene in a little while and see what comes up. Thanks. Everyone, hope you all had a lovely break. Sorry to interrupt your discussions. Hopefully they can also be continued after this session. So now we're both very curious to hear some of your thoughts, reflections, perhaps questions. And I think Anna will go around with the microphone. Yes. So does anyone care to start?
I can start. So I have a question about the historical perspective, when the direction towards disconnection between the human and the rest of the world, or the mechanical and the rest of the world started, because you set a few time points, and I often also stumbled across ideas that the turning point has been the agricultural revolution. That's when we started having the idea that we can manage and control everything that is physical, that also later included our bodies. And how do you refer to those ideas, especially as most of the ancient cultures you focused on are already agricultural cultures?
Shall we collect a few questions? But you should write them down, maybe.
I'm happy to do it one by one. I think that's easier, because otherwise, it gets into a muddle in my mind anyway. No, I think the way I see it is that this is a very long historical process, and it goes through different phases. The agricultural revolution was a very important revolution, but then it's followed by the building of cities, and that's sort of accompanies it, and then the first machines are developed, simple machines, and then the machines get more complex as time goes on. I think the thing I would say about those ancient cultures that were agricultural is that they still had a very strong relationship to the spiritual powers that were within nature in order to be able to grow the crops and so on. Just as the pre-agricultural peoples also had a strong relationship to the spirit world. But of course we don't really know quite what it was like when you go so far back that there are no written records, and we have to imagine what the consciousness was like in pre-Neolithic times. But it would seem that they were living in very close relationship to the spirit world.
Like I remember you writing about in ancient Egypt along the Nile, how this was an incredibly important aspect of, if you were planting the seed. I mean, you know this better than me, but the yearly flooding of the Nile and how it was connected to the ancient myths of Isis and Osiris, etc., etc. So it was all very interwoven.
Yeah, totally interwoven. The religious festivals were also, they were tied into the agricultural cycle, the cycles of the seasons. But yes, I mean, I fully understand that. You're saying that that's the agricultural revolution was again a kind of fall, perhaps, from a previous relationship to the world of spirit that was perhaps more intense, more close. I don't know. Is that partly what you're saying?
Partly yes.
Partly yes. Partly. Do you want to say a little bit more?
Yeah, I think maybe also if I would follow up on that isn't it also the idea of us being the machine connected to the divide for the spirit, the soul, and the mind, and the body, that the body is separate from the rest, that we can guard ourselves out of the rest of the world. But then we started accompanying more and more into what we could manage and control, and now we come back to the idea that we could manage and control everything in ourselves, just as in machines.
Yeah, I think so. I just mentioned one machine which particularly interested me. It was the shadouf, which was one of the first machines to have been invented in the ancient world, which is simply a sort of lever system where for drawing water out of a reservoir or a canal so it's just a wooden pole on a microphone with a bucket on one end and a weight on the other. So that's the first machine where instead of the person, the farmer, having to go into the water with a bucket and pull it out, you have a machine do it instead. saves time, more efficient, but it's also the application of logic. So the mind is involved. It's a yes or a no kind of binary thing that comes into play there, and that really interested me, because in the Mesopotamian cultures, it was very it was common from about the earliest one, sort of the 3rd millennium BC. But in Egypt, they held back. They didn't introduce it for a long time afterwards. And that question, why didn't they introduce it, really interested me. And I think it was to do with a feeling that this machine was somehow getting in the way of the relationship to the gods. If you're going with a bucket to collect your water from the River Nile, then you're in a relationship to the river god as well. You go in there with a sense of some sort of reverence. If you're standing on the side of the river doing this with your shadoof, you've already become detached, and it's this. You're physically detached to your body, but you're also mentally detached, and I think the Egyptian priesthood refused to do it for a very long time successfully. But when you have I don't know how many people here are au fait with Egyptian history, but with the pharaoh Akhenaten, there was a revolution in Egyptian. The whole culture was turned upside down at that point, and a lot of the traditional gods and the worship of the gods was banned, and those gods were basically ostracized. And that was the point when the shadoof was introduced. Interesting. Yeah.
Shall we get some more?
Hi, thank you so much for the discussion, and I hope I'm not being too loud. My question takes a different direction, which is about the discourse AI. So with the open letter, we have, let's say, that represents a discourse that's more that have like a negative, more toward how should we pause the technology, the development of technology, in order to solve the negative consequences of what AI could bring forth. And I think in the discussion earlier, Jeremy, you mentioned someone from Google also quit because of that, because of the negative consequences. I myself is an AI researcher, and in my teaching and research environment, I encounter a different discourse or narrative. People are more excited about AI. People are very excited about what the technology, the new opportunities that will bring, say maybe to teaching. At the same time, there is also, I can say, somewhat a defeatist attitude toward the technology, and there is a sense of powerlessness toward the progress. An example, a very recent example, I would say, is ChatGPT. When my university released recently guidelines on how we can use ChatGPT. And essentially, I don't know how exactly it's phrased in the document, but in short, my impression is that ChatGPT is here to stay, so we have to deal with it. So my question to you is that there are these multiple narratives or discourse on AI. And I guess they will exist in parallel, right? Then how will different discourses drive the development of AI then? If that makes sense. Thank you.
That's a very interesting question. And the thought that comes to me in response to that is the question, who or what are you serving when you're developing this technology? That's a question which I think is the one that got those researchers who signed the open letter and the following single sentence statement a couple of months later. That's the question that I think came into their minds, that maybe we have been serving something anti-human, and which could have serious consequences for humanity. And whatever it is that one's doing in one's work, I think that question we have to answer for ourselves. Who are we serving, or what are we serving in the work that we're doing? It may be that those researchers who are really excited about AI do feel that they're serving the greater good of humanity. And let's hope they're right. But it comes back to each person to ask that question of themselves. And yeah, I read a couple of articles by journalists in the New York Times, working for the New York Times, who both had spent quite a lot of time in Silicon Valley and sort of trying to get a feel of what was going on there in the minds of the people. And they gave the impression that really of this rubbing the Aladdin's lamp, this sort of picture of not really quite knowing what was going to come up. That you develop this technology and you don't really know what genie is going to appear, and you just hope for the best. But that's not a very good basis for doing it, in my view. So that's probably a rather inadequate response, but that's what comes to my mind anyway.
Thank you so much for your talk. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on, like, is it possible to understand the essence of a technology, but without referring to modernity's self-understanding? It's like in the modern understanding, AI is just like, electricity, voltage through logic gates. But in a non-modern understanding where the world is alive and imbued with spirit, in that kind of perspective, what are we actually building, and what is technology then?
Well, I think you have to to judge it by its effects. Can one say that the technology gives us a closer relationship to the world of spirit? Do certain technologies perhaps give us a greater awareness of the world of spirit? Or, on the contrary, do they tend to cut us off even more? For me, and I can only really speak personally, I feel that the world of nature gives me far more, infinitely more access to spirit than the computer does. And in fact, I feel drawn away from it when I'm sitting in front of my computer. But then there are lots of other aspects to modern technology than just sitting in front of a computer or consulting a smartphone. But we have to judge that each ourselves, I think. I'm aware of the distractive capability of especially smartphones, the handheld computer, which so very easily takes us away from the connection with inwardness, our own inner connection to our souls, and what's going on within us. Instead of going there, let's just check the smartphone. You know, it has as far as I experience it and sort of sense its effects, it tends to take us away from a direct awareness, which is what I seek. But it may be very different for other people.
I was thinking about something you wrote, Jeremy, about how in modern technologies we've have combined electricity and logic, as you were sort of also saying, and that electricity previously, or how electricity previously manifested itself, was very much in the realm of the gods, and so the lightning or it could be said, as you've said, kind of belong to the underworld in some way, but certainly very, very powerful forces. And that also that logic was something that generally didn't have anything to do with the important things in life. And it's more of a that it doesn't have any content in a way. It's a system. So my feeling would be that non-modern peoples would probably think we were playing a very dangerous game with these forces that we don't quite understand, perhaps. And I mean, the electricity that runs here, it feels very maybe innocuous or something. But maybe when it comes to that and to other many other things as well, we maybe all things have a kind of spiritual quality, or an inner quality that we are not so often aware of. So maybe they think we were being very reckless. I don't know, perhaps.
You want me to?
Yeah, if you want to add anything, that's
Yeah.
that's what I've taken from other things in our conversations.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that of course, in antiquity, they did have a view on lightning, and which is the manifestation of electricity within nature. And for example, in ancient Greek theology, mythology, there were two aspects to Zeus. He was this great sort of cosmic god who but there was a chthonic aspect to him, and as the thunderer and with the lightning bolt, this was more the underworld Zeus that was manifesting rather than the heavenly Zeus. So these two aspects of Zeus were recognized in the religion. So I think there was an awareness that electricity came from a different region and in a hierarchical worldview where the heavens represent the sort of the spiritual realm of the gods, and the earth is more the underworld. That strikes me as being a very interesting manifestation of that worldview. But with logic, I was fascinated to find that in the medieval world, when logic was one of the 7 liberal arts, so it was studied in the cathedral schools and then in the universities, it was represented in the manuscripts and also in certain sculptures as a dragon. It's so interesting to see that. And sometimes this dragon was shown to be, you'd see a picture of Logica with a long sleeve, and the dragon would be just up her sleeve. You just see a couple of claws and this sort of face appearing from under the sleeve. So that was, they had a kind of a deep ambivalence towards logic and its provenance, where it came from. So logic, in the 7 liberal arts, logic was usually in representations, and I think in the curriculum also, logic was sandwiched between grammar and rhetoric, as if grammar and rhetoric were the guardians who made sure that logic kept in its place and didn't overstretch itself. Time for another question, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm not sure if I can make this into a question, but I'm going to try anyways. And it's about when we were discussing here around the table, one of us had extensive knowledge in the practice of yoga and meditation, saying that there are so many tools out there in order to sort of reach what he's talking about, but somehow you and others tend to not sort of go into that. You say maybe just look up in the sky for half an hour and it will do the trick. And another anecdote is when I lived in a student dorm, I had a friend, my neighbor, who was a convinced sort of revolutionary Marxist, and he said that the first ones to go would be the Buddhist monks, because they are the most individual ones ever met, so to speak. Do you, because when you speak, you know, like it's really easy for us to sort of understand this on a personal or individual level, but on a societal level, like it's very easy, I think, for this all, like we're all in here, we're reading these books and all kinds of stuff as a hobby, and then the world is sort of just like rolling by outside of our actions, so to speak. Do you have any? Would you be able to describe any kind of societal change that would benefit the human being over the machine, which is not then sort of a, you know, like an individual action, but a societal or an action as a society?
Okay. as a society, I feel we've become so urbanized. I think it's really important that we societally make the connection with nature. I mean, it's a bit boring to say that, but I think it's so important, and that means actually really looking at the way that food is produced, and it would make a very big difference if we banned industrial farming and really work to replace that. It can't be done overnight, but work to replace it with organic and regenerative farming. And so our whole relationship to food changed. And there was, if there was a very powerful, well-financed campaign to bring people to an awareness of where their food came from and what was healthy and what isn't healthy. This is, so, you know, avoiding ultra-processed food and so on. I think this would be a step in the right direction, especially as there is now a very large investment in lab-produced food and in going in that direction, and a propaganda campaign which is castigating cows as being unecological, and we should get rid of all our cattle in order to save the planet, and in the end get rid of all our farms to save the planet and just produce food in laboratories on the edges of cities, or maybe in the center of cities. You know, this is the direction that we're going in. So I think as a societal change, that would be quite a big one, actually, to return to develop a really efficient form of organic farming. There's only one thing, but something.
May I add something too? Yeah. There's some applause there. That's good. I agree with that, and maybe I'm sure we could come up with some other sort of suggested societal changes. But it's interesting. There's kind of a paradox in the sense of, you know, we can feel like these suggestions are individual and only focused on ourselves. But what's interesting is that we're always in relationship, and we're always in contexts. And then at the same time, there is something also that we have to start with. We have to somehow start with ourselves and what feels alive to us. So now Jeremy suggested changing the way we produce food. And maybe you feel, well, actually, I don't really care that much about that, which is fine, because that's not everyone's, what everyone is interested in. And I think that it seems like for me, seeing what is happening in my context, and then very important, finding others who I somehow can connect with, not necessarily through in an organized way, but it can be in loose ways like this, but where you share a certain sense of wanting to do something to promote what feels alive, or det levande, so better in Swedish. And I think that because there's so many ways that we need to do it, and so that if we of course we can say some things that very obviously need to change, like ending the massive ecological destruction that we're always engaged in, etc., etc. And we already know in many ways what we need to do in that. But then I think that although it can feel very small starting from where we are and finding those few people, we don't need to be many, just a few people with which we feel like we want to do something. And then you don't know what will happen, I think. Any more thoughts?
Well, thank you for a very interesting conversation. I was wondering, as a philosopher, if you have been tracking the philosophical and religious roots behind the AI research. Like if you look at the fathers of AI, and a lot of the time people in their interviews, sooner or later somebody will ask them, what do you think about death? And then a whole can of worms opens. So the transhumanistic philosophy is a big thing in the AI community. But they have even deeper roots than that. The Christian philosophy, the gnosis. So what would be your tracking of the worldviews that led to AI? And they didn't come under the umbrella of science at all. They came under the umbrella of religion once upon a time, and philosophy.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, yes, I mean, the origins of transhumanism. It does go back to I would say the early 20th century. At least. No doubt earlier I haven't really thought about the origins of transhumanism, but of course transhumanism is the worldview that it seems AI sits most comfortably within. And there are some very frightening transhumanist philosophers around. Like Yuval Noah Harari is one of them. Homo Deus. Wow, I mean, that's an extraordinary... It's based, you see, transhumanism is based on the reduction of the human being to a machine anyway. So that goes back, you could say it goes back to Descartes and La Mettrie, and you know, it's part of that whole philosophical stream, which just becomes more and more extreme as it goes forward. And then, but it has this. You might say it has a Gnostic aspect as well, but not. I mean Gnostic in the sense of a world-rejecting aspect, and that then goes. It takes us right back to Manichaeanism, and you know the whole Gnostic movement in the early centuries of our era, where one actually is wanting to escape from nature, and one feels that the world is so imperfect that it's up to us really to recreate a paradise of our own making. In fact, you find that in Francis Bacon very strongly in his myth story of the he calls it the New Atlantis, where these sailors from Europe get shipwrecked and end up on an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and they find that there is the perfect scientific society. So it's a sort of technocracy, and they are already this is in, when was that published? 1620, in the 1620s, and they're practicing genetic engineering. They've got telephones and submarines and the whole thing. But I think that that's part of this movement of thought. But perhaps the most distinctive thing about transhumanism is this idea that we can actually transcend the body, and through some sort of downloading of consciousness into an artificial substratum, whatever it would be, which could be used as a computer. But there are transhumanists, especially Ray Kurzweil, who have a view of the transhumanist future as being it is cosmic, that once you have super intelligence, in other words, intelligence that is greater than human level intelligence, in his terms, then it will expand exponentially and colonize the whole universe. So the whole universe will be turned into a kind of giant computer. That's his kind of view of the culmination of human evolution. Forget about the Earth. So it's a very sick view of the future, but Kurzweil has he's been incredibly influential, and he has a lot of followers. So one has to take this seriously, that this is a kind of modern. There is a powerfully world-rejecting, anti-earth, anti-incarnational strand to the development of these technologies. Sorry, that was a bit of a random answer.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Do you know Harari personally?
No, I've never met him, and I'm not that keen on meeting him. I've never been anywhere in his vicinity. I don't think.
I think we have time for one or two more.
Yes, thank you for your talk. Very interesting. I just wanted to ask a question, not that I really know anything about it myself, but there are also other people talking about archons as an entity of wanting to, or having an intent of robbing the humans of their humanity, kind of a question. So do you have any opinions about that?
And maybe say something about archons for those who don't know.
Oh, me say something about archons. All right, okay.
I certainly can't say anything about that.
Yeah, no, well, I know that there was a book that came out very recently, and I haven't read it, and I can't even remember the title, but this is part of Gnostic mythology. The archons are I suppose one might say that the sort of evil spirits who try to keep humanity away from the true spiritual, our true spiritual home, if you like. And I would certainly go along with the idea that there are adversarial powers who are at work, who would whose intention, one might say, is to constrain humanity so that we do not develop towards real spiritual awareness and eventually a union with the divine world, which, of course, is the ultimate end. And most religions express it. They express it in different ways, but the goal of all of this historical, one might say, mess, but the historical process is, in the end, the transformation, the spiritual transformation of the human being and of nature, but a spiritual transformation, not a material transformation, which is so destructive, which is what we're witnessing now, but through the power of love, through a loving attentiveness to the natural world, to bring about a kind of an uplifting of nature towards the divine. This is something that one can experience oneself to a very limited degree when one really pays I would say reverent attention to nature, that one feels that actually our human consciousness has a gift to bring to nature, and it does seem to me very, very likely, in fact almost definite, that there are spiritual powers who seek to prevent us from developing in this way, and would prefer to bind us to a purely materialistic worldview, and actually create a technosphere, which is a term which I find probably the best term to describe the world that's coming into being, a technosphere, which binds us into this soulless form of existence in which we don't develop our spiritual potential, and we also transform nature negatively into a kind of technological hell. So yeah, the archons, I'm not sure about. I mean, it's a good enough term, but I'm not sure if we should. Not having read the book, I can't really say exactly what this particular author is wanting to say, but certainly I think there are adversary powers which we should be aware of, and which we need to counterbalance.
Thank you so much for your conversation. I struggled the whole evening with something that I find really difficult to express, but I give it a try. And that is something about that I feel that it's kind of dichotomous. Like, I obviously also feel, or like, I really seek being in nature and worshipping that relationship. And then I'm also kind of in working as an educator in technology, and I'm kind of wondering what to do. I'm tempted to leave, and then I feel like, well, but maybe I could do something to help with relationships. And then I feel like I can't convince people to just go to nature, because I mean, where to go from here, from this state, from this word, from this technical word, where people invest and are part of developing technologies. There must be more than relationship to nature also, or could we imagine a relationship to technology and kind of coming to learn to live with technology in a more destroying, so kind of not destroying, but perhaps more caring, also caring about technology, so to care for nature. So couldn't we imagine a relationship to technology also, to develop a relationship to nature, to not just see technology as evil? So I don't know what the question could be, but where to go from here, given the fact that we are living in this technical world?
Well, it's first of all, I think it's important to accept that technology is here. We can't just wish it away, but because it's here, we have to form a relationship to it. First of all, in which we are free in our relationship to it, and we're not addicted. That's crucial. And in education, that should be a key part of it. How to teach children how to maintain their independence, to be able to put the thing down or to turn the thing off. And that's a real educational challenge, I would say, today, to be able to instill in the child, in the young adult, a genuine independence in relation to the technology. And the reason why that's so important is because then it becomes possible to make sure that the technology is serving your purposes, your intentions, rather than you succumbing to the intentions of the corporation, whatever it is, that's trying to seduce you into spending hours and hours and hours on the machine and robbing your soul, really, to give them profit. So I think it sounds to me like I think it's very important that we recognize that we need to be more educated in relationship to it. And then I'm sure it can, of course it can be turned to good. It's not intrinsically evil. It's how it's used and how it uses us, and if we allow it to use us. But so long as it serves, we can make it serve genuinely human ends, which are not the ends of corporations, and it's not to do with making money, but actually to help us become better human beings and to do things that we want to do, then I don't see that's an issue. It's really just to do with this balance between our ability to actually use it in the right way and not be used by it.
If I can add, I'm also thinking that, I mean, it's important to realize that you know, interactions between humans is also an interaction with nature, of course, too. So having a real honest conversation in a meaningful way, for me, that is also giving some of that same quality for me anyway. And I think it would be a very interesting. I think that we can develop. I agreed with everything that Jeremy said. That it's about how we develop our relationship to those technologies, but also that I think we could develop technologies that are much more aligned, that bring out, that help us perhaps more bring out our human qualities, rather than constantly sort of shutting them down. So that would be a good challenge for your students at the university, I think. What would it mean to, you know, to develop technologies with an awareness of spirit, for example? You don't have to use those words, but I'm sure you can think of a clever way of putting the challenge to them. Okay. I think if anyone... Is there a last burning question, or... Some of you look a little sleepy. Yeah, Rafael.
Yes, okay. So I have a yes or no question for you, Jeremy. So this will be easy. It feels, listening to you, like we should go back in our connection with nature, and maybe to be able to go forwards in our application of technology, to reach the sustainable society that we're aiming for. But I wonder, but then I ask myself, but then Ingrid kind of said it as well, because it's like this focus on nature. Why not just focusing on the human relationships? Why do we need to go to nature when I think there's so much to learn, also to do with our relationships with other people? But then Ingrid said that was also nature.
It's part of nature anyway.
Right. But so I would like to understand maybe 2 or 3 of your. I mean, because we want these grand solutions. We see we're in this urgent, flaming world that we need to. There's all these challenges, and we have so short time. We want to find the big solutions that are going to solve it all really quickly. And we're in our compasses are like spinning. We don't really know what to do. So I feel like we need to kind of train our compasses somehow, and so if that's my question, how to train our compasses? Could you give me 2 or 3 favorite movements that you would like we could start small, that we could start really small, and that could maybe be that we could scale? Yes or no, please.
You said 2 or 3. That's 2 or 3 movements. That's not a yes or no question.
Yes.
You're not really being fair.
Yes. Are you sure? Yes.
Well, this sort of gathering is very, very positive, I think. We get together and we discuss these things. It's very important that we do that. I think it's a wonderful evening, really, to be able to just together consider these things. But yeah, I don't regard the relationship relating to nature and developing organic methods of food production as going back, really. I think it can also be a going forward too, and because it's a form of community building as well. I'm not sure if I can do the third one. But it seems to me, I've said it already, really. I just repeat that I think it's terribly important that we give ourselves, you talk about us all being in a spin, that we get ourselves out of the spin and just calm down and experience stillness, and then we come back to ourselves, and that's the best place from which to then deal with whatever problems there are out, that we're faced with the world, and that's on a daily basis. We need to keep coming back to the still center within us, and then, then we can stand in the world in the right way, and we can stand in relationship to the technological challenges that we face in a way that we feel in contact with our own humanity, and I think that's the most important thing.
I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you, everyone, so much for being here, and thank you especially to Jeremy, and also his partner Luann, who I've had the pleasure of spending the last few days with. And just to let you know, Jeremy is also having a talk in Järna on Wednesday at the Biodynamic Association. So, if you live around there, you can touch base again, or make sure to let the people you know around that area, you can let them know about that. But most of all, thank you so much to everyone, and yes, hope to be seeing you again soon. And Anna and Daniel, it's fine for people to hang around for a bit, yes?
Yes.
And continue the chats.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
You're welcome to stay.
Have another drink, and we'll be around for a bit as well.
And thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.